Welcome, everybody, into another edition of the Big Ten Show. We're going to have some fun today. All right, I'm going to give my way too early college football preseason top 25. I'm going to break it down by conference as well. We're going to start with the Big Ten teams, okay? And then we're going to talk a little bit of SEC in the top 25 as a whole, along with the Big 12, the ACC. You'd be surprised how many of these conferences actually have a good amount of teams in my preseason top 25 and how many conferences do not. Okay, and where does Notre Dame fall? Because, of course, they get to have their cake and eat it too, I guess, because they'll never have to join a conference. Where do the G5 teams rank? Do I have any of them ranked at all or not? Is the world even fair? Does the world even care about group of five teams anymore? All right, we're going to chat about all of that here to start off the show today. Then we're going to talk about Nebraska football. Can they finish the season ranked? All right, so I put out my way too early win-loss record prediction for Husker football a couple of days ago. Check that out on the Character Chronicles. Go to YouTube, go to characterchronicles.com. If you missed that show, spoiler alert, I predicted we go 8-5. Now, is that good enough for Nebraska to finish ranked? That's the question I'm going to try to answer today. Can Nebraska finish ranked? So our top 25, break it down by conferences, of course, starting with the Big Ten. Then can Nebraska finish ranked? And then we're going to talk some NCAA basketball tournament Final Four. And we're going to kick it off with Caitlin Clark. Okay, she actually wanted to go to UConn. UConn's coach, I call him Coach Geno, never even spoke to her. Never visited an open gym, never spoke to her parents. She wanted to go to UConn, and she didn't get recruited at all, basically, by probably the greatest women's basketball coach of all time. Not probably. I believe that he is. Okay, the greatest women's basketball coach of all time. So that makes for an intriguing matchup when Iowa plays UConn. South Carolina, well, they're pretty much just going to destroy NC State, but we'll chat about that briefly because NC State's an interesting story. They're an interesting story for one reason. They have a women's team and a men's team, both in the NCAA tournament Final Fours. Also, they've also attached themselves to North Carolina and all this conference realignment stuff. Now, that's not a topic I'm going to dive into in too much depth today, but I will in the future. But NC State's future may be a lot more certain than people realize and a lot more certain than 90% of the other teams out there right now in the ACC conference because North Carolina is the number one coveted brand in all the ACC conference, and they can't really do much without NC State because that board that determines what North Carolina can and cannot do has a majority, for some reason, of NC State people on it. All right. And then we'll talk about the men's Final Four as well. I think there's a potential, incredibly intriguing national championship game pending between Purdue, the number one seed who got beat by a 16 seed last year. The last time that happened, Virginia, number one seed, lost to a 16 seed, next year won it all. Is Purdue going to do the same thing? They could potentially play the defending national champs and the favorites to win it all in UConn. Now, Purdue's got to get by the the hottest team in America, the NC State Wolfpack, the men's team. All right. And then can UConn make it into the championship game as well? But let's start off with my way too early college football preseason top 25 rankings. Now, let's start with the Big Ten. Now, the Big Ten has 3 teams in the top 10 and 4 teams in the top 25. All right. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If you look at these conference breakdowns as a whole, all right, the SEC has 3 teams in the top 6, 5 in the top 10, and 10 in the top 25. And I'm a Big Ten person. So for the SEC to have so many teams in, that's me trying to be unbiased and give my honest opinion. The Big 12 only has 1 team in the top 10, but 5 in the top 25. Now they're in that bottom 15 to 25 range and got quite a few in the 20 to 25 range. But they actually have more top 25 teams than the Big 10 does, even though they have far less teams. As in, they have 1 in the top 10, okay, where the Big 10 has 3 teams in the top 4. Okay, now you look at the ACC, they have 0 teams in the top 10. This is a conference just hanging on for dear life, okay? But for now, they're still a conference, so we'll pretend like they matter. All right, they have 1 team in the top 15 and 5 in the top 25, though. They are definitely bottom 20 to 25 rankings heavy, okay? The G5... I'm like one of the few people that actually roots for G5 teams. I feel like everybody just dismisses them. Nobody likes Cinderella at the ball anymore, I guess. It's just all about the big brands, the big names, and let's just poo-poo on everybody else. That's how I feel. I like the Cinderella story. I like Boise State over Oklahoma. I like Utah smashing Pittsburgh. I like Utah upsetting a number 4 ranked Alabama team. If you don't remember these games, shame on you. These are some of the best bowl game upsets in history. And by the way, this is back when Utah was in the Mountain West. They were a G5 team, I should add. A lot of people tend to think of Hawaii, Georgia, which was ugly. Guess what? Ugly bowl games happen every year. Just because a G5 team gets a butt whooped sideways doesn't speak for all G5 teams that play every single season, every single year. Otherwise, every single team that ever gets blown out should just be ignored. Because at some point, everybody's going to get blown out. Because that's just how it works. It's called competition. Okay, I think of Tulane USC a year ago. And even some of the great games that we've had over the years. I believe it was Western Michigan or Central Michigan. I always get them mixed up. I know it wasn't Eastern Michigan. I believe it was Western Michigan, might have been Central, had a great Cotton Bowl versus Wisconsin a few years ago. It came down to the last play of the game. Okay, those are the games that I get excited about. I always look forward to the Rose Bowl. I always look forward to the college football playoff games. Up until now, I know it's going to change in the future with the 12-team playoff and the 14-team playoff and the 1,000-team playoff that's going to come after that because we've stepped foot on this slippery slope and it ain't going to end. Just give it enough time. We're going to have a way more than 14 teams eventually. Okay. But I'm one of those guys that would always look forward to the Rose Bowl, the college football playoff games, and which bowl game has that G5 team in it in the New Year's Six bowl games. That's what I've been looking forward to since 2014, the past 10 years. It's all going to change in the future. As we know, at least we get one G5 team in the college football playoff 12-team system, 14-team system. They're always going to have that last seed probably, so they're always going to have the toughest opponent. Notre Dame. They get to have their cake and eat it too for now, I guess. Okay. I have them in the preseason top 25. So let's light this candle. Let's dive into my preseason. Way too early. Top 25. Let's have a little bit of fun. Now, I'll be honest with you. Man, when I was trying to decide between Georgia and Ohio State, they were 1 and 2 right off the bat in my mind. Like Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. That was an easy 4 right there. Before I even had to think, those were my top 4. The only question was really the order. I knew 1 and 2 was Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia. I knew 3, 4 was Oregon, Texas, Oregon. All right. I'm going to go with a little bit of a surprise. I'm going to go with Ohio State as my preseason number 1 right here, right now. Okay. How do you respond to your bitter rivals who beat you for 3rd straight time and then go undefeated and win a national championship by going all in on the transfer portal and hiring a former head coach and dynamic play caller to revamp the offense in Chip Kelly? Okay, quarterback Will Howard from Kansas State. Okay, he's going to give another dynamic weapon with his legs. Now, what can he do passing-wise is the question. He's a decent passer, but how above average is he? How average is he with his arm? He's got weapons around him. He's got a great defense to support him. He's got Chip Kelly who knows how to draw up plays. Okay, and run an offense. He's got legs that he can make plays with. Can he do enough with his arm? Kyle McCord. I don't know that they throw a whole lot different. The difference is Will Howard has the legs. Can Will Howard be a step up, at least just a smidge, when it comes to throwing the football? Got to remember, he left Kansas State because he kind of lost his job to a freshman, a good freshman, I might add. Very good freshman with a bright future. So no disrespect there. Okay. But they've also added probably the best running back in the entire SEC conference, Quinshawn Judkins. Okay. So they had arguably the best running back in one of the best running backs in the Big Ten coming back. Donovan Edwards of Michigan might have something to say about that. But then they had probably the best running back out of the SEC. They have the most dynamic duo in all of America in their backfield. They have a quarterback who can make plays with his legs. They have 8 returning starters on defense. Okay. Maybe the best offensive coordinator in America, probably. All right. They also added dynamic defensive playmaker, Caleb Downs from Alabama. Okay, one of the most coveted players in all the transfer portal. All right. They keep Emeka Ibuka. And as I mentioned, tailback Travion Henderson coming back. And a lot of guys on defense. I think Ohio State has that chip on their shoulder. I think they have the talent. They didn't just bring in talent. They brought in proven players, and they have proven players who stayed. It reminds me a lot of Michigan from last year. I know Buckeye fans are going to puke when they hear that, but that's okay. I'll get you a bag. And if you win a national title, you're going to feel pretty good about what I just said. Right now, man, it was tough between them and Georgia. I have them edging out Georgia, who is just as overall talented, probably more talented than Ohio State. What I like about Ohio State is two things. They brought in proven players. They have proven players coming back, a lot of them that didn't have to come back. When you bring in Caleb Downs and you bring in Judkins and you bring in Will Howard, those are guys that could go just about anywhere in America for the most part and start immediately. Okay, Georgia, 1 or 2 recruiting class every year in the country for like the past 94,000 years. The only coach in America that actually could out-recruit Nick Saban a decent amount of the time was Kirby Smart. Georgia is never going to step on a football field and have less talent than their opponent. They're rarely going to face equal talent. Okay, when you look at Georgia, I've got them number 2. And the other reason that I put Ohio State just like 50.1% of Georgia, and for Georgia 49.9%, my 1 and 2 teams in the country, is I think Ohio State's sick and tired of hearing about Michigan. They're on a mission this year. Not just Michigan, but they want to win the title. They're literally a field goal kick away or a non-penalty on a fake punt away from winning a national championship 2 years ago. Because let's be honest, if they beat Georgia in that game, they're going to smash TCU just like Georgia did in the national title game a couple years ago. So they were very close. You look at this Georgia team. I mean, they've just got NFL talent across the board. They've got a lot of returning playmakers, some people who went on, but they were fairly young on defense last year, and they got pushed around that defensive line, especially in that SEC championship game versus Alabama. There's no frickin' way Kirby Smart's going to let that happen again. He's too good of a coach, okay? They do have a little bit of a challenging schedule, let's be honest. An opener against Clemson in Atlanta, a Clemson team that's probably sick and tired of what they perceive to be disrespect over the past few years. Okay, road games at Kentucky, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss. Ole Miss and Colorado made the most amount of noise in the transfer portal this year. Ole Miss because they could, Colorado because they had to, because they didn't want Shedeur Sanders to get killed, so they had to get somebody who wanted to block. I still don't know if they've addressed the defense at all. All right, the greatest cornerback of all time, Deion Sanders. All right, his defense didn't want to tackle last year at all. And let's be honest, Deion wasn't known for tackling. He was known for covering and making plays. All right. Now, Georgia did lose a couple of folks in the secondary. They lost cornerback Kamari Lassiter and safeties Tyreek Smith and Javon Bullard. Okay. But they've got guys who can step up. We just don't know exactly who it's going to be yet. They've got like 2 or 3 guys that are top recruits in the country at every position competing to be the starter there. They're going to be fine. They just got to get that experience, and they're going to be thrown into the fire right away. Okay, so number 1, Ohio State. Number 2, I got Georgia barely at number 2. Now, number 3, another Big Ten team. I got Oregon. It was tough between them and Texas, honestly. Now, you look at Oregon. The Ducks' biggest victory during the offseason was undoubtedly Coach Dan Lanning's commitment to stay and not going to Alabama and becoming their head coach. Lanning guided the Ducks to a 21-5 record during his first 2 seasons, and now he'll lead them into their maiden campaign in the Big Ten. He proved his recruiting chops by signing ESPN's number 4 ranked class and landing a handful of top transfers. Former Oklahoma starter Dylan Gabriel. I mean, I have written down here a plug-and-play replacement for quarterback Bo Nix. But let's be honest, he's probably going to be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Drew Aller's got the talent. We'll see what Will Howard can do with all the talent around him. But the best plug-and-play and the best quarterback in the Big Ten as of right here, right now, in my opinion, before we have seen a single game, okay, is Dylan Gabriel. And he may have, I don't even know if this is possible, but he may even be an upgrade from Bo Nix. He's certainly not a downgrade in any way, shape, or form. Okay. Now, they added safety, Kobe Savage from Kansas State, and cornerback Jamar Muhammad from Washington. Nice pickups from the portal there. All right, now they did have 3 starters leaving the secondary, but bringing in those transfer guys is going to help a lot. All right, Oregon plays at Michigan November 2nd and gets Ohio State and Washington in 2 big-time contests at home throughout the season. The reason I put Oregon slightly ahead of Texas, Oregon's got the speed, Oregon's got the quarterback, Oregon's got the athleticism. They got the physicality. Dan Lanning brought something to Eugene that the Oregon Ducks have never had. I shouldn't say never. That's unfair. In the past, when Chip Kelly was there and other coaches were there, they were always good. They were competing, winning back Pac-12 championships, going to the Rose Bowl. But here's what would happen. I argued they were too fast because I argued they were too small. Because when they would be way faster than their opponents 9 times out of 10, then all of a sudden in a major bowl game or a college football playoff game or the national championship game, whether you think of their Rose Bowls versus Ohio State or their championship game, okay, versus Auburn and Cam Newton, pretty good team that year. But they weren't unbeatable. Remember that Auburn team was at one point down 24-0 to Alabama. An Alabama team that had 3 losses that year. Still a good Alabama team, still Nick Saban as a coach, and obviously Auburn was pretty good to come back and win that game, but they weren't infallible. My point is, I always thought Oregon was too fast because I felt they were too small. When they faced a team with speed and size and speed, they would get pushed around. Not with Dan Lanning, a coach. Their offensive line runs 310, 320, 330. They're huge, and they're physical, and that's his focus. Texas, on the other hand, my number 4 team in the country, who could easily win the national title this year, to me, they're easily one of the 4 best teams in the country. The 4 best teams in the country on paper. Now, we'll see what happens when we actually kick the ball off next fall and start playing some actual football. But the 4 best teams on paper, in my opinion, going into the 2024 football season in college football, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Texas. Texas could easily win the national title, but the reason I put Oregon slightly ahead of them is they lost some beef up front. They had the 2 best defensive tackles probably in all of college football last year. A great pass rush. Okay. And they lost a lot of those guys up front of their front 4. Now they got Quinn Ewers coming back. Probably going to have to wait another year to see what Arch Manning can do. Okay. So they got one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They have talent all over the field. Steve Sarkisian has recruited incredibly well. The best Texas has recruited in a long time. They never completely fell off the face of the earth with recruiting rankings, but Mac Brown used to dominate recruiting. I'm not going to say Sarkisian has dominated because that would probably go to teams like Alabama, Georgia, but he's competed right there, probably the 3rd best recruiting program in the entire country over the past few years. He's right there with them. All right. The Longhorns finally proved their back by reaching the CFP for the first time and nearly taking down Washington. They were clearly outplayed in that game, and they only lost by 6 if you remember the end. It came down to the last play of the game. All right, lost 37-31 the semifinal in the All-State Sugar Bowl. Now Coach Steve Sarkisian will have to show his program can stay in the sport's upper echelon against increased competition in the SEC. We'll probably have to wait, like I said before, on another season to see what Arch Manning can do. He will, talking about Quinn Ewers, have to find some new targets this spring with receivers Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy and tight end Javon Sanders jumping to the NFL. So they got some guys to replace, but they have recruited well. They got talent waiting in the wings. Who's going to earn those jobs? Transfers Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Matthew Golden from Houston are plenty capable as well. Now the Longhorns play Michigan September 7th. They host Georgia, but they do not have a brutal schedule. They do not play Alabama, Auburn, LSU or Ole Miss during the regular season. All right, next up, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. This is a team that was pretty good a year ago. They lost their star running back, obviously. But after guiding the Rebels to their first 11-win campaign in the 118-year history of the program, Coach Lane Kiffin is gearing up for what could be an even bigger season in 2024. All right, Kiffin grabbed plenty of talent in the transfer portal. In my opinion, he grabbed probably the best transfer portal class in the entire country. I know Colorado grabbed a lot of guys as well. But when you think about defensive tackle Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, the former number 1 recruit in the entire country coming out of high school, he was the number 1 player in the transfer portal as well. Defensive end Pritzley Umanyilan, okay, the top edge pass rusher in the entire transfer portal from Florida. And linebacker, all right, Chris Paul Jr., just to name a few. He got the top edge rusher, the top player. He got guys across the board at a lot of positions that were number 1 in their position in the transfer portal to come. Okay. Had they kept Judkins at the running back spot, my Lord, I might have had them in the conversation for the top 4. All right. But I got them number 5. Coach Prime, probably the most entertaining coach in college football, Lane Kiffin, number 2. I am very curious to see what Lane can do this year because this is a year where they've got the talent. Don't want no excuses. They should absolutely be in the college football playoff. The question is, what can they do in the SEC? Can they get possibly a higher bid, get home field advantage in the first round? Can they earn a bye? Have to win the SEC to do that. but they got the talent to do it. All right. Now, number 6, I got Penn State. I may have said they were number 5 earlier. I misspoke if that is the case. Now, they were ranked number 10 previously. All right. Now, they weren't bad in Coach Marcus Freeman's first 2 seasons, winning 19 games, but it's time for them to turn the corner, and Freeman has laid the groundwork by adding former Duke quarterback Riley Leonard. Okay. This is kind of where you go for the rent a quarterback for 1 year at a time university, Notre Dame the past couple of years. Okay, Wake Forest's previous quarterback was at Notre Dame, their starting quarterback a season ago. He had 1 year. He was a senior. He's gone. Now Riley Leonard's basically going to do the same thing from Duke. All right. They brought back offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock, who directed LSU's ridiculously high-flying offense in 2023. Had LSU just pretended to play defense half the time. I mean, they could have been significantly better. Jaden Daniels was ridiculous. Their offense was insanity. They didn't win. They're the only team in America that might have been worse at defense in Colorado among the Power 5 teams. Maybe. Might have been. All right. Now, Leonard underwent ankle surgery to repair an injury suffered last season. He is expected to be ready for next fall, full go 100%. I believe he's doing some things in the spring, but full go 100%, no hesitation. The Irish also added receivers Chris Mitchell from Florida International and Bo Collins from Clemson to shore up an underwhelming receiving corps. Finding replacements for bookend tackles Joe Alt and Blake Fisher will be a priority throughout this spring practice. All right. Now, next up we got the Missouri Tigers. This is a team that of all the teams in the top 10, I think is the least talked about because they're Missouri. Okay, they won 11 games last year, finished top 10. I believe beat Ohio State in a major New Year's Six bowl game. I know Ohio State was banged up, to put it mildly, in that bowl game. But they still won. They got a lot of guys coming back, too. Okay, life without tailback Cody Schrader won't be easy. Okay, but they do have a few guys to replace. The Tigers will have to replace some key players if they're going to match last season's surprising success. Okay, but here's the deal. They got a lot of guys coming back. They got a quarterback coming back who's a playmaker, who can do some things. Okay, cornerback Toriano Pride transferred in from Clemson. Linebacker Darius Smith from Georgia, and defensive lineman Chris McClellan from Florida were key portal pickups on defense as well. I think this is a team that's under the radar with a lot of guys returning, some key portal pickups to replace some key players that they're going to miss. Keep your eye on Missouri. Keep your eye on Missouri. All right, at number 8, I have Penn State. Now, when it comes to Penn State, maybe the best defensive team in the country last year. I know stats, numbers can be misleading based on who you played. I would actually say it was Michigan. Ohio State and Penn State were the top 3 defensive teams in the country, in my opinion. Offensively, the only team that was harder to watch offensively in the country was Iowa. Their offensive coordinator is no longer around. Their offensive coordinator, Brian Ferentz, I lovingly called him Baby Ferentz. His dad had to let him go. That's how much their offense struggled at Iowa. Great defense, great special teams, great discipline. But if you can't score, Lord Almighty, if you have to put in the contract, you have to score 25 points a game and you ain't going to be around. That's not great, to put it mildly. Penn State wasn't as bad as that, as Iowa. But they were pretty hard to watch on offense. They had great running backs, a couple of very talented young running backs, good offensive line, an offensive tackle that's probably going to go in the top 10 in the NFL draft here shortly in a few weeks. Maybe the best defense in the country. Definitely top 3 in my opinion. But they just had a heck of a hard time throwing the football. Anything over 5 to 10 yards. It was tough to watch. I was rooting for the Nittany Lions. I actually predicted them to be better than Ohio State last year. I was wrong. I thought they would challenge Michigan for the Big Ten championship. I guess they played them and didn't get blown out, so if you want to define that as challenging, sure, they challenged them. But they really didn't. Michigan was the better team. I believe it was 24-15 or something like that was the final score, so it wasn't a blowout. But Michigan was clearly the better team, just like Ohio State. Didn't run them off the field, but they were clearly the better team the whole day. Penn State. This is a team that's going to be good on defense. They got Drew Aller coming back. They got talent in the backfield. Solid up front. The question is throwing the ball. Now they've added Wisconsin offensive lineman and defensive end. Okay. Let's see. I can't even read my own writing. Nolan Rookie. I can't read my own writing. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. All right. As the offensive lineman, defensive end, Jordan Mayer. Also, Tulsa kicker, Chase Myers. They also added, and this may be the most important one for the player himself and the university that he's going to, Julian Fleming. Some other additions, Georgia cornerback A.J. Harris, Florida cornerback Jalen Kimber as well. But Julian Fleming really didn't do a ton at Ohio State. Almost went to Nebraska. He was the number 1 wide receiver recruit in the entire country coming out of high school. He's got the ability, the size, the talent, the speed, the athleticism. He needs to have a big year if he wants to go on and play at the next level, try to get drafted. Penn State needs him to have a big year. Of all the transfers throughout this transfer portal offseason, this is the one I'm going to watch the most, because I don't know that there's another player that needed to go to a place more where he can make an immediate impact, and a place that needed a player like his talent to come in more and make an immediate impact than Julian Fleming at Penn State. If he plays to his capability, Penn State can challenge for the Big Ten title. If he doesn't, they'll be a rock-solid team, just like they were last year, that will not step foot in the Big Ten championship game or on that field. All right. I was going to go through the whole top 25, but man, I just love talking college football. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish out my top 10, and then I'm going to skip. I'm going to go to the last Big Ten team. Okay, I've gone through 8, which includes 3 Big Ten teams. I'm going to go to the last Big Ten team that I have in the preseason top 25, and then I'm going to finish out my top 10, then we're going to move on. So I have Michigan. Again, I'm skipping. The last Big Ten team in the top 25. All right, they have, 3 teams in the top 10. Okay, 4 teams in the top 13 because I have Michigan at number 13. All right, Michigan obviously finished the season 9-0 in the Big Ten champs for the 3rd straight year, 15-0, national champs, best team in the country last year. Lose their head coach, lose their strength coach, lose their entire starting offensive line, lose their quarterback, lose their starting running back, although Donovan Edwards will step in and do just fine. He's actually faster than Blake Corum. Does that mean he's better? I don't know, but he's faster. They have the 2nd least amount of returning production of any team in the entire country. The team with the least amount of returning production is Washington. I'm sorry, let me take that back. Any team in the Big Ten. 2nd least amount of returning production of any team in the Big Ten. And the team with the least amount of returning production of any team in the Big Ten is Washington. The 2 teams in the national championship game. They both lost their head coaches, both lost quarterbacks. Of course, Michael Penix Jr. had to go to the NFL. Washington also lost their AD. 15 players transferred to other Power 5 conference schools. They've only got 2 of their starters coming back. Talking about Washington. So guess what? They're not in my preseason top 25. But Michigan, I have number 13. I have Oklahoma at 14 for those that are curious, but I'm not going to talk about them just yet. All right, Michigan. The only first-year coach filling bigger shoes this season than new Michigan coach Sharon Moore's Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. Okay, but not only did the Wolverines lose Harbaugh to the NFL, but they also had to replace quarterback J.J. McCarthy, tailback Blake Corum. Again, Donovan Edwards is there. And most of their veteran offensive line, no, their entire offensive line. They had 6 offensive linemen who were going to the NFL draft. Harbaugh took much of his coaching staff with him to the Chargers, including defensive coordinator Jesse Minter, defensive backs coach Steve Kliskale, and strength and conditioning coordinator Ben Herbert, who was making $1 million a year as a strength coach. And Harbaugh called him the secret sauce to the whole thing. Hard to argue when you have the most physical team in the entire country, which all starts in the weight room. Moore hired, okay, talking about Sharon Moore, the new head coach, hired former New York Giants defensive coordinator Wink Martindale to replace Minter, which might make things easier since Minter was running a version of Martindale's system. The Wolverines will play one of the most difficult schedules in the country. Boo-hoo. All right, Texas, USC, Oregon, and road games at Washington. Now, I don't know how good Washington's going to be, but playing at Husky Stadium, that's a brutal place to play, and obviously on the road at Columbus versus Ohio State. All right. So I do think Michigan has built a culture, has built a program. Sharon Moore knows what to do. I don't think they're going to fall off the face of the earth. Okay. But I do think they're going to have, and it's tough because the expectations are going to be so high based on what they've done the past 3 years. They're going to be an intriguing program to watch this year for me because how good can they be? What are they able to do with all the pieces that they lost? You notice I didn't talk about 1 million incoming transfers. Now, they have a coach who coached, 6 games last year? Okay. Has won road games, has won against highly ranked teams. Okay, they found out Harbaugh was suspended on the plane, going to Happy Valley, and then the next day they beat Penn State on the road, who was a top 10 team. So The transfer player that I'm watching the most this year is Julian Fleming at Penn State for reasons I've already explained. The team that I'm probably going to watch the most is Michigan because they're the most intriguing to me for everything I just mentioned. All right, let's finish out the top 10 here. I'm way behind schedule, but that's all right. We're having fun. And then I'm going to call it good for today. All right, number 9, I got Alabama Crimson Tide. This is a bit of a wild card, kind of like Michigan. They had so many players transfer out. You lose Nick Saban. You bring in Caleb DeBoer, who is a stud coach. There's so many question marks right now. You have such a tradition built. You do have talent you're walking into. You do have talent experience who left. Replacing Nick Saban undoubtedly is probably, arguably, I don't know about undoubtedly. I think there's other coaches, the Bear, Tom Osborne, that are definitely in this conversation. But Nick Saban, arguably the greatest coach in the sports modern era, is not going to be easy. Alabama's transition under former Washington coach Kalen DeBoer has already been rocky with Downs and highly regarded quarterback Julian Sayin transferring. Okay, Bond and tight end Amari Niblack jumping to Texas, offensive tackle Caden Proctor returning home to Iowa, but then returning back to Alabama. That's a story in of itself. So I guess they won that one, kind of. And several players leaving for the NFL. Then to make things a little bit more challenging, offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb and offensive line coach Scott Huff took jobs with the Seattle Seahawks recently throughout this offseason. Saban's dynasty wasn't built with tinker toys, so the Crimson Tide will be fine in the long run. I do believe. The Tide added 3 Washington transfers. Okay, should mention this. And quarterback Austin Mock, receiver Jeremy Bernard, and offensive lineman Parker Brailsford, defensive lineman. Okay. Overton. God, I got to write so much better than I wrote today. Overton is the part of the name I can make out. I do apologize. Okay. And cornerback Damani Jackson from USC were nice pickups on defense. DeBoer knows how to build a championship program. That is true. But how patient will Alabama's fans be? I'm curious about Michigan. If I was to write down another team that I want to keep my eye on, and part of it has to do with the patience of the fan base, it's going to be Alabama. And I think Michigan fans will be a little bit more patient than Alabama fans. I think Michigan fans have not been spoiled as long. I think they understood what Harbaugh did. I think Alabama fans, I don't mean spoiled in a negative sense. You know, if I could have nice things that just never seem to end, I'd take it. So it's not a negative thing. I do think they've been spoiled, okay? And I think that's going to make them a little bit more impatient. All right. Rounding out my top 10, and then we're going to move on. This was hard, man. You got Arizona, you got Utah, you got Kansas State, all 3 teams that are the top 3 teams predicted to win the Big 12 Conference. Who knows what to make of Colorado this year? Okay. The Big 12 Conference is going to be the most chaotic, wide open conference in America, the most entertaining to watch, I think. I went with Utah as my top 10, my 10th team in the country to round out my top 10, and my uber slight favorite to win the Big 12. Now, the Utes lost 4 games or more in each of the past 3 seasons as they were undone by mostly injuries, honestly, and lost 4 of their last 6 games in 2023. Now, with quarterback Cam Rising returning, this was the tiebreaker for me. If you remember the Rose Bowl, Utah versus Penn State a couple years ago, it was close and a dogfight. Rising went down, Penn State pulled away. I was actually impressed with what Utah was able to do a year ago without Cam Rising. Okay, so with quarterback Cam Rising returning from a knee injury that caused him to miss all of last season, the Utes could be much better in their first season in the Big 12. Tight end Brant Kuith is also coming back from a knee injury along with tailback Micah Bernard. The Utes started 4 sophomores and a freshman on the offensive line last year, so that unit will grow up and has a lot more experience. After losing 3 starters in the secondary, Utah added safety Alake Gilman from Stanford and quarterbacks Cameron Calhoun from Michigan and Keenan Johnson from Georgia Tech. I'm going with Utah to round out the top 10. They have a culture. They have a physicality. They've been so close. When their quarterback went down, that tilted everything. I'm also kind of a Utah fan. I don't know, I just am. And I'm also not very confident in that. I'm pretty confident who the 4 best teams in the country are. I'm not confident who the best team in the country is. That's why we play the games. And I'm not confident who the best team in the Big 12 is at this moment in time, but I am confident the Big 12 will be the most entertaining, exciting conference to watch in football. And I'm slightly picking Utah to win that conference. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our next topic at hand. I wrote this down. I do want to cover this real quick. April Fools, a few days ago, I know. Now, one of the first tweets I saw, you got to keep in mind, I'm not a morning person. I'm that person that's exhausted, and then 10 o'clock at night, I get a surge of energy. It was great in college. It's not so fun when you have 6 kids who are going to get up at 6 a.m., 5:30, whether you want to or not. So I'm not a morning person. So the first tweet I saw last Monday, April 1st, was that Nick Saban had decided to come back and coach Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer was going to be moved to the offensive coordinator. I just stared at that tweet. Now, first of all, I was just trying to process life because I just woke up. It was like a full hour. Again, I do not wake up quickly. I always played better in afternoon or night games than I ever did morning games. Baseball was even worse. That thing was moving way too fast in the mornings for me when I was growing up. About an hour before I realized, oh, crap, it's April 1st. So then the whole day goes by, and I'm not really on social media at all on Monday. Monday's my craziest day of the week, Mondays and Fridays. So it's like 8, 9 at night. I haven't quite got my second burst of energy yet. And I see this tweet from a Nebraska account. I forget what the account was. Might have been Barstool Huskers. I can't remember. Dylan Raiola is announcing that he's leaving Nebraska after spring ball and going back to Georgia. And I would just, again, I'm not processing properly. I haven't been on social media. I haven't done an April Fool's or got an April Fool's all day, so it wasn't on my radar. It took me like 30 seconds before I was like, oh, okay. I was just in disbelief. I think I even responded to their tweet, wow, just wow. Man, that would have been awful if either one of those things were true. No disrespect to Nick Saban, but that would just be a dirty move. And I don't think it's something Nick Saban would do either. For Nebraska, that would have been horrible. All right. I was going to talk about if Nebraska could finish ranked. I may save that for another show. Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead to some college basketball talk. We got about 8 to 10 minutes left in this fine show. Hopefully you're having fun, having a good day. So the women's college basketball Final Four may actually, for me personally, be more intriguing than the men's. All right. So after the LSU-Iowa Elite 8 basketball game the other day, the women's basketball, Joe Popliano tweeted out, at 12.3 million viewers. This is a couple days ago. Last night's Iowa versus LSU game had more viewers than any women's college basketball game ever, the 2023 NBA Finals, the 2023 World Series, the 2023 Orange Bowl, the 2023 Big Ten Championship game. Well, that's because Iowa was in the game. Okay. I was actually interested in women's basketball. It's not in college football. It's just not. And that's not because I'm a Nebraska guy. They're just not. I was rooting for Penn State last year, and they were almost as bad on offense, and they were almost as hard to watch, and I was rooting for Penn State. Anyways, I digress. Okay. The 2023 Big Ten Championship, the 2023 Cotton Bowl, the 2023 Pac-12 Championship, the 2023 Big 12 Championship, the 2023 ACC Championship, the 2023 Peach Bowl, Thursday Night Football. Who watches that? Okay. And by the way, that in itself is proof that they do not give a crap about players' safety. It is a facade and a mirage. It's a business plan so they can make more money by pretending to care about their employees, the NFL, a.k.a. their players. By the way, college football is the same way. Otherwise, why are we playing just as many, if not more games, potentially down the road on the slippery slope than NFL teams do? I digress. Let's get back to the topic at hand. And they have more viewers than every 2023 college football regular season game except for Ohio State, Michigan. And he goes, absolutely incredible. That's the Caitlin Clark effect. It's that simple. Plus, you had Angel Reese, you had Kim Mulkey, you had LSU, you had the rematch from the national championship game a year ago. Okay, obviously, Iowa wins that game. They're clearly the better team. Caitlin Clark, she reminded me of those old Larry Bird, Michael Jordan videos, commercials, I think McDonald's commercials, off the roof, off the skyline, off the clouds, off Antarctica, off Australia, off the floorboards, off the roof, nothing but net, if you remember those old commercials. All right, so again, Caitlin Clark, I call him Coach Geno, the UConn women's head basketball coach, greatest women's basketball coach of all time, wanted to go to UConn. Coach Geno, never recruited her in any way, shape, or form. Iowa plays UConn in the Final Four. Now, based on how Caitlin has responded to other things, I doubt if she's going to make a big deal out of this, but that's an interesting underlying storyline for me. Almost as interesting as the Iowa LSU underlying storyline for so many reasons. Now, the Hawkeyes are 3-point favorites. Nobody ever talks about this in college basketball, men's or women's, but the over-under is 162 points. So they think each team's going to score around 80 points. I think it'll be more than that, especially if Clark gets hot. The Hawkeyes shoot 37.8% from three-point range. The Huskies average 19.7 assists per game. They're a very unselfish team. All right. Why UConn can possibly win. The Huskies generally thrive this time of year under Coach Geno. UConn has made the Final Four 23 times in school history. The Huskies have a versatile offensive unit this season. They rank first in the Big East in scoring, 80.7 points per game, field goal percentage of .500, and rebounding at 38.8. They were also second in three-point percentage at a .366 clip. All right, the Hawkeyes, why can they win? The Hawkeyes come into this matchup with the best statistical offense in the country, the best player in the country, and Caitlin Clark. They rank first in the nation in scoring, 91.9 points per game. Now, I do think Coach Geno is going to come up with a game plan to shut down Caitlin Clark, to try to limit Caitlin Clark. I still think Iowa's going to score. But if anyone can limit what Iowa can do, it's UConn, Coach Geno, and his game plan. All right, Iowa, first in the nation in assists, 21.2 a game. They're an unselfish team. That includes Caitlin Clark, who has several assist records, career NCAA tournament, Big Ten assist records, etc. And in field goal percentage, shooting 49.9%. A lot of that due to Miss Clark. All right, this potent offense is carried over into the NCAA tournament, scoring at least 89 points of 3 of their last 4 games. Clark seems to have limitless range, as I mentioned earlier, and has the skill set to light up the scoreboard in the flash. The 2023 AP Player of the Year, ranked first in the nation in scoring, 32 points per game, assists, 9 assists a game, and 7.3 rebounds per game. That's nearly a triple-double. That's insane. In the win over LSU in the Elite Eight, Clark had 41.7 rebounds and 12 assists. I'm going to go with Iowa. Iowa as an overall team, as a whole, is not as good as they were last year. Caitlin Clark is better than she was. This is a team game, and the thing that makes her so good is she's so unselfish, which is why her field goal shooting percentage is even higher than it could or should be, because she's an insanely good shooter, but you can't just leave her wide open because she'll find her teammates. Or you can't double team her and leave her teammates wide open because she'll find them and they'll destroy you. I don't know about destroy, but they're going to score too. I've got Iowa over UConn. All right, the other side of the women's bracket, I'm not going to talk about this long. All right, NC State's an interesting story. Their 11th seeded men's team is in the Final Four. Their number 3 seeded women's team is in the Final Four. It's because they're playing South Carolina. All right, they've won multiple games in this tournament by 20, 30, 40 points. They've only remotely been tested one time. Now, this is the first time since 2016 in the women's Final Four that 2 teams are a number 3 seed or lower. Now, I should mention, UConn has a plethora of injuries, not to bounce back to UConn, Iowa. Can you tell which game I'm more interested in right now? And unless South Carolina gets upset, then I'll become very interested in that. But UConn has 6 players out and only 7 players they can realistically count on, and most of them are freshmen, sophomores. Great coaching job, again, by Coach Geno this year. I do have South Carolina and Iowa in the championship, and while that's an intriguing championship because it's the best team in the country in South Carolina versus maybe the greatest women's basketball player that we've seen in recent times, if not ever, in Caitlin Clark, South Carolina is just too good as an overall team. I got South Carolina winning that game. Quickly, let's go to the men's. Number 1 Purdue versus, number 1 seeded Purdue versus number 11 seed NC State. Number 1 seed UConn, the number 1 overall seed, the defending national champions, versus a football school that for some reason is somehow good at basketball, and the 4th seeded Alabama. I'm pretty confident UConn's going to beat Alabama. Purdue and NC State. NC State's the hottest team in the country. They are. And in a one-game scenario, this is not best of 3, 5, or 7, 9 or 11. Nobody does that, but you get my point. Anybody can beat anybody on any given day. I'm going to take Purdue, but this, I believe this is either going to be the most entertaining game of the tournament or Purdue's just going to destroy them because finally NC State cools off. Purdue's the better team, but in a one-game scenario, anybody can win. I'm going to go Purdue and UConn in the national championship. I talked about this the other day. I'm not uber confident in Purdue getting there, but I think they're motivated. They remind me of the basketball version of Ohio State. They're sick and tired of hearing about previous years. In Purdue's case, last year, losing to a 16 seed. I do think they win, and I think it's the most intriguing matchup we could have for the men's national championship, just like the women's, when you got Caitlin Clark versus South Carolina, if I'm right, and the odds of that are probably less than 50%, but that's okay. Life goes on. If I get this right, you've got the team looking for redemption, the number 1 seed that was ousted by the 16 seed a year ago, Purdue, versus the defending national champions, the number 1 team in the country. At the end of the year, they were ranked number 1 in UConn. You got the defending player of the year, current Big Ten player of the year, and Zach Edey, literally head and shoulders above everybody. This is the matchup I'm rooting for. I'm not sure who I'd pick. I had an easier time picking South Carolina over Iowa, which means I'll probably be wrong in the women's championship if those two teams get there. This was much harder. I believe UConn's the better team. I believe going back-to-back is hard versus a team that's uber motivated in Purdue. This was harder for me to predict. I still don't know who I'm going to pick. But I'm not going to do another Big Ten show until after this game is played, if this is indeed the national championship game on Monday. So I'm going to force myself to make a prediction. Now, I did more recon on the Final Four matchups than I did this potential national championship matchup. Because, again, the odds of me being right in this are probably less than 50%, probably less than 30%. But let's say I'm 29% correct and I get this right and it's Purdue versus UConn. Man, I tell you what. Here's the thing about Purdue. Zach Edey can dominate down low. They shoot 40% from three-point range. It's hard to stop them. I'm going to go with Purdue. I'm going to go with the Big Ten team, and I don't care if you call me biased. All right, ladies and gentlemen. As always, check out our good friends at the Jacobson Seed Company, your healthy hybrid advantage. Farmers, we not only give you phenomenal Big Ten coverage, at least I hope you believe that is the case, but we also can take care of all of your healthy hybrid advantage seed needs. Go to jacobsonseed.com. Until next time, this has been the Big Ten Show. I'm Adam Carricker. Have a glorious day.